Hello to Rabbi Jonathan Wittenberg.
Hello, shalom, shalom.
Could I ask you to introduce yourself?
So thank you for including me. I'm Jonathan Wittenberg. I have the privilege of being the rabbi of a large Masorti congregation in the north of London and of responsibilities for the Masorti movement here and actually in some parts of Europe as well. Thank you.
So as part of the responsibilities for your congregation and for the broader community here and elsewhere, how has this coronavirus affected you? What have been your greatest challenges in dealing with it?
It's affected profoundly and in some ways paradoxically. We've had to put the whole community into virtual, online, but in some ways, this very isolation and distance between us has engendered a proximity of heart and spirit. People feel a profound solidarity. When I talk to people, and we have a whole outreach system to particularly for the over 70s in our community, but when I try to ring a number of people each day who I hope would appreciate it, most of them tell me the neighbors have been incredibly kind. There's a spirit of closeness that they haven't experienced before. Many people are coming to shiurim, and there's a sense also that this is not the persecution of a particular religion. This is not a national problem. There's a sense that humanity is together in this across the globe, and that can be deeply moving. So there's distancing, but there's kirva nafshit on a very serious level, and I'm humbled by that, and I'm moved.
Kirva nafshit, what does that mean?
I'm meaning a sense of spiritual togetherness, a togetherness in hope, in prayer, in concern for one another, and in participation in our whole society. There's a huge appreciation for people working in the National Health Service here in Britain, people providing food, people making deliveries, and by extension, there's a sense of identity and solidarity with those services in other countries, and very, very large number of people, particularly young people, saying, what can I do? How can I volunteer? How can I help?
Beautiful, beautiful, very inspiring. So let me ask a question that flows from what you just said now. I was going to get to it later. We can move it up. So there's this paradox, as you say, where on the one hand people are shuttered in, they have to protect themselves. On the other hand, they have to keep up a sense of solidarity. So what are the resources for that solidarity? What is it that brings about this sense of solidarity between the people, and how can they enact it if they're forced to stay indoors? So what are the theoretical and the practical expressions of how to maintain solidarity despite being under lockdown?
I'm not a very technical person, and I'd never thought I would appreciate the privilege of having laptops, phones, and other such instrumentalia in the way that I do. But for many things, Zoom works. It connects people. People like to see one another, to see each other's faces. For me, the sound of the human voice is actually even more important in connecting by phone with people. So those are means of being both virtual and somehow nevertheless close. But a question I've been asking myself is, what travels through the ether? Prayer, loving wishes. One of the very, very difficult parts of isolation is we have a number of members of our community who've got family in hospital, some in ICU. They can't visit. They're dependent on the hospital, which are under enormous pressure to send out information. They feel absolutely powerless. The person who may be close to the end of their life is totally isolated from those they might have loved for 50 years. So I said to a couple of people, take a picture and hug it. And somehow, I suppose, I believe that these things travel. And the knowledge that that is what people are doing, which, we have a daily 11 o'clock minute from our different leaders and rabbis in the community. I'll talk about this. I believe that somehow this travels, and it does invisibly engender a heartfelt solidarity.
Maybe I could say, if our prayers travel virtually, why can our loving wishes not travel horizontally to one another. I mean, the thoughts are real, feelings are real. Let me share with you a teaching of the Baal Shem Tov. He says, where a person thinks, that's where he is. So
Absolutely.
all these are instruments of placing one's mind in association with the suffering people. They create a bond.
And devarim hayotzim min halev nichnasim lalev.
Meaning?
Things which come from the heart enter the heart. And that's probably intended for when a person is speaking and others are listening, and one feels that presence occupy a physical space in a room. But I believe it occupies space, full stop. And that somehow perhaps people know, can't prove it, but I believe it.
It's as though the whole world was contained in God's heart. When our heart connects, it makes one space.
Yeah, fair. That's beautiful.
So let's talk about some attributes of the heart and how these are affected by the Corona crisis. Fear, a natural response. Fear in some people becomes panic, worry, anxiety. I'm sure a rabbinical leader spends a lot of time trying to calm people, to assuage their fears. What can you tell people who are afraid? How to overcome the fear?
So that's extremely important. We're lucky in our community to have somebody coordinating pastoral care who's outstanding, who has put out to our whole community and beyond a very broad series of resources, from how to try and sleep, how to contemplate and meditate. We've increased actually our contemplative and meditative services online, which are being followed, not yet by lots, but by a number of people.
What are contemplative and meditative services of a synagogue? It's the first time I hear. That's a wonderful notion. Can you unpack that?
They begin with a small amount of Hasidic teaching, which I do. They then have something sung. One of the favorite pieces is the nighttime prayer of the archangels. In the name of the God of Israel, on my right hand is Michael, who is like God. On my left hand is God is my strength. Before me, I'm guided by God is my light, and behind me walks God's healing, and over my head is the presence of God. And then a structured meditation, and then more singing. And I think that'll become more needed. But of course, there are moments of high anxiety for particular people. And one thing I've been saying is that we all have holes in our morale. That the notion that, some of us are managing and others are not is probably untrue for all of us. That we all have our moments, and being able to reach out and phone someone we're very close to. That's what rabbis are there for. And I have had quite a lot of phone calls of people in times of panic, and they're just trying to spend some time on the phone to hear, to help people find something they like and care about and can do. Favorite music, favorite poetry, something they might research online, a thought, a dish to cook that they've got the ingredients for, which can just bring, it's been said, bring to the now. Because what one can't do is say that there aren't things to be scared about.
So these meditative services, they're available online at the North London Synagogue. Anybody can Google it and find them?
I believe so, but I'm not very tech, so
this is a wonderful resource.
Sure.
Thank you.
I think it's something perhaps others could.
It's great to know about that. Very a resource that can extend beyond your own community. Thank you. So let's go back to the question of solitude, and to a certain extent, you've already hinted at that with some of the activities, but people find themselves confined. And many people are not used to it, and they're not used to being alone, not used to being inward. How to deal with the sense of forced seclusion, solitude, how to turn the vice into an opportunity?
Well, yeah, to make miniut ni'imut, that I learned from you many years ago, maybe 40 years ago, how to turn the things which are difficult for us, our barriers, into things which are opportunities and pleasantness. First of all, I just want to say that this is not at all the same for everyone. I'm very lucky to have a large garden. It's the most amazing asset at this time. I almost feel guilty about it. And in fact, I've been doing online tours of the garden once a week to share it with people. And somebody who's got a large house is not like somebody who's got a tiny flat and 6 of them in there. And also a parent who finds themselves with 3 children at home. It's a delight and it's really hard. And also a fragile older person who finds themselves cut off, can't see their grandchildren. The family can't come in case of infection. So there is no equality here. I think it's very, very important to say that. Nor is there equality in the experience people might have had of solitude. Some people are drawing on a long, well-developed capacity to be with themselves. For other people, this is a very new experience. What I would say about what we can do with it, thank goodness, most of us, but not all, have access to immense online resources of learning and entertainment, and actually shutting off from everything is, I think, not only legitimate, but necessary for a bit of time. Reading, writing up memoirs, looking at family pictures, if one has access to them, sorting them, labeling them, writing the story. All these are calming activities. I'm very bad at this, but actually cooking a meal, even for one, there's an awful lot of how to cook online. Keeping fit, differentiating one's day. I've heard that from a lot of people. Work runs into meal times, runs into everything. Where's there any differentiation? Making a point of saying, at this point of time, I switch off and I read or I sleep. At this point of day, I do half an hour of exercise. And a lovely thing I saw in the paper of somebody who worked out how many times they have to go up and down, up their stairs to climb Mont Blanc. And when will they reach it? And then at what date will they reach Everest? Now that's amazing. And actually, people are also being very inventive. So looking and learning from what other people are doing. There's also prayer. There's, of course, prayer, which is just time saying the words aloud. If that's not familiar, taking 3 or 4 favorite poems, reading them slowly, aloud, stilling one's mind. In other words, re-entering and re-inhabiting some of the quiet inner chambers that we may be unaccustomed to visit because we've been too busy.
Beautiful. Thank you. Deprivation. We're dealing with all kinds of deprivation. And as you say, it changes from person to person. But there's an overarching reality of being deprived of freedom, contact, relationship, health, sometimes life. How does one deal with deprivation? How does one deal with the fact that we're used to having, it's being taken away from us?
So there are 2 very different kinds of responses here. One is there is a huge amount of concern about what will be the financial implications of this. For some people, it's immediate, and for others, it's long term. The longer term, I think, in many countries, we just don't know. But I'm minded of the Mishnah, which discusses wealth and possessions, and it opens with, what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours. This is the way of the average person. And then it has a rider, Yesh Omrim. There are those who say this is the way of Sodom. And I think that there will be a very important and profound call to be generous, to share, to protect and support those in our respective societies who will lose their income, who may lose their jobs, who have to let go of employees. So one of the ways we have to deal with deprivation is by helping minimize it for one another in a manner which has to be more extensive and more socially conscious and more driven by the Jewish values of tzedek and chesed than perhaps we have been in the past. But I also want to say something. right justice and loving kindness, or faithful kindness to our fellow human beings. But there's something else I also want to say, which is, and I hear this from a number of people, and it's particularly true for those of us who are part of the middle classes. We have treated the world as our oyster. We have taken for granted the fact that we can buy virtually anything and travel pretty much anywhere with ease, with impunity. And one of the questions is, when this is over, is it status quo ante? Will the world return to how it was? And do we want it to return to how it was? One of the very, I hear from people, I've gone through my freezer and this is not something we've usually eaten. I'm conscious of throwing nothing away. I'm valuing every bit of food. Now, these are important, enduring things. And I believe at heart, in a way, this is an environmental crisis, concerned with how we treat each other and how we treat our world, God's world, globally. And deprivation is not in itself a good thing, and certainly not harsh deprivations for anybody. But there's something to be learned about appreciating, about not asking too much, about respect for food, money, possessions, space, travel, beauty. That aspect, I hope, will be an enduring legacy and maybe timely in terms of the world's environmental crisis.
Do you see a causality between the environmental crisis and the corona crisis? Or do you think they are operating in complementary ways that affect the human psyche but may not be factually dependent on one another?
I don't know, and causality is a word that makes me, I think, has to be treated with some caution. There's a danger for religious figures that it's one step from saying there's a causality to saying God brought this on us as a deliberate punishment.
Yeah.
So I'm not sort of, I'm cautious here. There may be a causal connection in the way animals get treated, how that then enters human life, the way it spreads because of our huge international contact, and the way diseases among animals have spread, and the way diseases among trees have spread. Actually, there's been the ash and the oak, two of the iconic British trees, have been affected by things that have come from elsewhere. I'm not saying that in nationalistic tones, but rather that our international trade, without perhaps sufficient respect for the particularity and needs of each country, each place, each person, probably has had an impact on the spread of coronavirus. But beyond that, beyond any scientifically causal connections, there's, I think, a profound connection, a moral and intellectual connection, which is we are one humanity. What happens to one will ultimately happen to all. And what happens to nature, Melech Lasadeh Mishubad, even a king, even the president of the United States is ultimately subservient to the soil.
So that launches us really to the next point, which is that everything is interconnected. If the lessons are that it comes from one kingdom to the other, and the king is connected to the soil, then everything is connected, and we see this in the implications now. How do you understand this interconnectivity from a Jewish perspective, and in what way should it apply to our religious practices or translate in our religious practices?
I'm thinking aloud here because I haven't really explored that. I haven't really explored that question. One level, yes, I've long been passionate about nature and have been really a campaigner in the environmental. I've been part of some of the environmental protests in this country, and one of the leaders of the Jewish community in it. And in fact, Art Green, who's in Jerusalem right now, we've worked a little bit together on this. I have huge admiration for him. So making sure that's high on the agenda and working to be clear that the cost of this crisis should not come out of those monies that governments have set aside to green their economies, but there should be, in quotes, a green recovery, is very, very important. Now, in terms of Judaism, one aspect of that seems to me has always been there, and another aspect needs a transformation in our thought. The aspect that's always been there is this is Olamo Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This world belongs to God, and anyone who enjoys it without sufficient consideration, the technicality is below bracha, without blessing, but I think it means without respect, without consciousness of what we're doing, is as if they've ma'al. It's a misuse, unintentional perhaps, but it's a misuse of that which is sacred. And we need to really regard the world as sacred, as, you know, if we're not going to believe formally in God, as something which the spirit of all life is interconnected, and we need to take that profoundly seriously in the way we eat, in the way we travel, in the way we heat our homes, in being modest in what we use, in ending the throwaway, it doesn't matter, the world is my dustbin culture. For Jews, I think this is an appeal to be less insular than we sometimes are, to understand ourselves, and Elijah is at the forefront of this more than anyone, as part of the collective concern and agenda of humanity, to participate alongside leaders of every religion. Although parts of the Western world are highly secular, the vast majority of the world is not. And the voices of religions, and they have to be different voices in different places for different groups, need to find the right language in which to communicate these messages supportively alongside a message of greater social justice across the world. An outstanding example of this is Pope Francis' encyclical Laudato Si.
Beautiful. Having concluded then with, brought it back home to the home and the hub that's launching this conversation, this is really a beautiful place to end it. I'm grateful to you for your thoughtfulness, for your heartfulness, for everything that comes across. As you alluded earlier, we know each other for 40 years, and personally, I take such joy in the fullness of how you practice your rabbinate in the fullest spiritual and human way.
I really appreciate you asking me those questions. It's helped me think. It's centered me on what matters, and I feel particularly close to you about this. And I hugely value that. I hadn't at the beginning thought what this would lead to, but I so appreciate being asked.
Well, the gratitude is mutual. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's keep in touch.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye.